My name is Avery Collins, 31 years old, living in Chicago, Illinois. For years, I had grown accustomed to the fact that every major holiday was a stage for my younger sister, Hannah, to be praised and celebrated, while I was nothing more than a spectator sitting quietly in the back row. But this morning, when my phone buzzed on the small kitchen table of my rented apartment in the West Loop, I still couldn't stop the sharp sting that came with reading my mother Judith's short message. Thanksgiving this year is just Hannah and her husband, keeping it small. Just a few simple words, but they cut like a knife through a wound that had never healed. I stared at the screen as if the message might somehow transform into something else, some kind of mistake. But no, it was there, clear and familiar. I took a deep breath and typed a single word in response: enjoy. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't explain. Just one word, but inside me, a fire had been lit. I would not spend another holiday sitting alone in a cold apartment. This time, I would not let them control the story anymore. Because what they didn't know was that I had another place, a $6 million lake house on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, just over an hour's drive from Chicago. I would open that lake house, not for those who had excluded me, but for everyone else who had ever felt pushed aside. I would call Aunt Linda, my cousin Noah, my grandmother Evelyn, all the ones who were always left sitting quietly at the edge of the table. I would set a long table, one without a so-called kids' table. A place where every person had a seat, a voice, and a reason to feel seen. And together, we would celebrate a true Thanksgiving, one where nobody would be forgotten. I share this story not to complain, but to ask you something. Have you ever been excluded from your family's table, treated as though you didn't deserve a seat? If your answer is yes, tell me where you're listening from, so I'll know I am not alone in this journey. And stay with me until the very end of this story, because there, you just might rediscover your own worth. I still remember the Thanksgivings from my childhood as if they happened yesterday. Each year carried a fresh cut to my heart, no matter how many times I told myself I had grown used to it. The truth is, you never really get used to being pushed aside by your own family. In our house in Columbus, Ohio, where we spent all our growing years, the living room was wide and open, and the long dining table stood in the center of the kitchen, always perfectly set by my mother for the holiday. But there was one thing that never changed. I was pushed to the so-called kids' table, a flimsy side table shoved into the corner, lower than the main one, with wobbly wooden chairs and a worn, frayed tablecloth draped across it. I can still recall the sting when I was 18 years old. While friends my age were driving out to visit family and sitting in seats of honor at their main tables, I, the adult daughter of the Collins family, was still directed by my mother to sit among the little cousins in 4th grade. She laughed and said, "You sit over there, it's easier. Hannah and Tyler need space at the big table." I didn't argue, but as I lowered myself onto the tiny chair, I caught Grandma Evelyn's eyes. They were filled with quiet sorrow, as if she understood everything yet felt powerless against Judith and Robert's arrangement. A year later, that memory deepened with another layer, this time through Thanksgiving gifts. My family had a tradition of exchanging small presents after dinner, a way to mark the beginning of the Christmas season. I never expected much, but that evening, my parents presented Hannah with a polished key box, and inside was the key to a brand new Mini Cooper. The whole family cheered, and my mother announced proudly, "My daughter deserves this reward for making us so proud." I clapped stiffly, a frozen smile on my face, even as my stomach twisted in knots. When my turn came, my mother handed me a small envelope. I opened it to find a $25 gift card to Target. I tucked it away quietly, still smiling, but deep inside I heard a whisper. "You will never be worth as much as Hannah." In those years, I slowly learned a strange kind of survival. Shrinking myself, quietly becoming a shadow in the kitchen. While everyone laughed and chatted in the living room, I rolled up my sleeves to help my mother wash dishes, chop vegetables, and set the table. I was never praised for it, but in that invisible space I discovered something about myself. I had a natural talent for organization, for making things run smoothly. I learned how to manage time, assign tasks, and adjust the smallest details so the dinner would never fall apart. Ironically, being excluded from the main table, being pushed into the kitchen, taught me the very skills that later helped me build my own career. But, looking back, I see it clearly now. My parents' love always came with conditions. You had to be like Hannah, had to stay close, had to fit their picture of the right kind of daughter, in order to earn a seat at the main table. As for me, the moment I chose a different path, I was labeled as troublesome, shoved to the margins. Those Thanksgivings were no longer about family gatherings. They became proof of the division, a reminder of my place in the Collins household on the outside, silent and unnecessary. I knew I had to find a way out of this cycle. And college was the path I chose. When I left Columbus for Urbana-Champaign to attend UIUC, I knew I would be on my own. No one in the family would reach out to catch me if I fell. My parents didn't send a single cent of support. They told me flatly, "You chose to leave home, so you're on your own." I swallowed the hurt and realized I had no choice but to stand on my own 2 feet. I got a part-time job in the kitchen of a small restaurant near campus housing. At first, it was just washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and taking out trash. But over time, I was trusted with prep work, then cooking side dishes, and eventually even covering kitchen shifts when the head chef was away. Those late nights that stretched until 2 in the morning, with the smell of grease clinging to my hair and hands, taught me how to run a commercial kitchen, from managing inventory to scheduling staff, from controlling quality to handling crises when ingredients ran out. And I began to notice something that always unsettled me. After every dinner shift, the restaurant threw away bins of untouched food, while just a few blocks away, long lines of homeless people waited outside food banks for a meal. That thought clung to me and wouldn't let go. I started reading about food logistics, studying models in Europe, and attending small workshops on campus. I saw a glaring gap. Restaurants had endless surplus, food banks were always short, yet the two sides could barely connect in real time. When I returned to Chicago for a summer internship, the picture became even clearer. Restaurants in River North shut down after dinner service, tossing out enough food to feed dozens of families, while just a few miles away the Greater Chicago Food Depository struggled to scrape together scattered donations. I began sketching ideas on scraps of paper, a technology platform that could match supply with demand, optimizing routes so surplus food could move directly into warehouses or distribution points. After graduation, I decided to turn that idea into reality. With no capital and no connections, I named the project Meal Bridge, the Bridge of Meals. At first, it was just me and a fellow computer science student. We coded through the night in a cramped apartment, using free servers and Google Maps data to design a prototype. I went door to door at restaurants, pitching the idea of zero waste, zero hunger. Most of them laughed or waved me away. Nice idea, but we don't want the hassle of legal liability or transportation. Some were blunt. Leftovers? Just toss them, it's faster. I bit my tongue, swallowed the humiliation, and kept going. In the early days, cash flow was almost non-existent. I worked late shifts as a bartender and delivered pizzas just to cover hosting fees for the website and buy a few insulated containers. At one point, the MealBridge account had only $300 left, barely enough to survive another week. I knew if no one agreed to pilot the project, it would die before it began. That's when I turned to the Greater Chicago Food Depository, the same place where I had once seen long lines of people waiting for food. I stood in front of the program director's office and pleaded for a chance. I said, "We're not asking for money, only for a small pilot. If it fails, we'll disappear like it never happened. But if it succeeds, hundreds of tons of food could be saved." After many meetings, they finally agreed to test it in one limited district. The biggest challenge wasn't routing data, it was food safety. Surplus food from restaurants couldn't just sit for hours before reaching the end user. If stored improperly, the risk of food poisoning was high. Together with my partner, we designed a cold window module, a system that tracked the time and temperature of food from the moment it left the restaurant until it reached the food bank. If it exceeded the safe window, the food was automatically flagged red and barred from distribution. This gave restaurants peace of mind. knowing liability was managed transparently. In the very first month, Mealbridge moved about 7 tons of food, mostly bread, soup, and leftover cooked meats. I still remember the first time I rode in the small delivery truck from an Italian restaurant downtown to a food distribution point on the south side. Boxes of warm pasta were stacked neatly, and when we arrived, hundreds of people were already waiting in line. A boy, maybe 10 years old, clutched a container of pasta like it was treasure, looked up at me, and smiled. That image told me I could never walk away. But the road ahead was far from easy. Every week I faced dozens of setbacks, restaurants canceling at the last minute, drivers abandoning shifts, food banks overwhelmed with supply. Some nights I drove the truck myself through freezing wind, my hands stiff on the wheel. There were days I had to borrow thousands of dollars just to make payroll, then hustle to sign contracts with smaller restaurants to bring in more revenue. I thought of quitting more than once, but the memories of those Thanksgivings when I was left out, of sitting alone in the kitchen washing dishes, kept me going. I told myself, if I survived years of being treated as invisible in my own family, then I could survive this storm too. Then the opportunity came when no one expected it. The entire national food supply chain began to falter. Restaurants shut down en masse, food banks faced severe shortages, and even hospitals and schools struggled to keep up. In that moment, Mealbridge's real-time routing module became a lifeline. We built a feature that displayed live inventory. For example, if a large restaurant in Lincoln Park reported 500 surplus roast chicken meals, the system would instantly locate the nearest distribution site that needed that exact type of food, then dispatch a truck on the most efficient route. If one truck got stuck on the Eisenhower Expressway, the system would immediately send another to replace it, ensuring the food would not spoil. Within 6 months, Mealbridge had grown tenfold. We were handling hundreds of tons of food each month, connecting more than 200 restaurants with dozens of food banks across Chicago and the surrounding area. Local media began paying attention, calling us the lightning bridge between surplus and need. I appeared in a short piece in the Chicago Tribune, still holding a container of soup, my face exhausted after a long shift, but with a genuine smile. I wondered to myself, if my parents read this article, would they finally feel proud? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Still, their pride no longer mattered as much as the truth. Mealbridge was making a real difference. We weren't just saving food, we were saving dignity for the people who lined up for meals, people society often forgot. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I was also saving the child who had once been pushed to the kids' table by proving that I could build a table of my own, one where everyone had a seat. After 3 years of struggle, Mealbridge finally turned a page. A corporate fund specializing in ESG initiatives approached us, expressing interest in acquiring the entire platform to integrate into their distribution network. I still remember sitting in a conference room on the 37th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, facing their lawyers and representatives across the table. The number they offered nearly took my breath away. $82 million, with an earn-out clause over the next 3 years. I knew this was the chance for Mealbridge not only to survive, but to expand nationwide. But more importantly, they agreed to one condition I insisted on. I would retain a share reserved for employees, and there would be a dedicated fund to support small food banks, the ones usually forgotten in large-scale projects. When I signed the contract, my hands trembled, not because of the enormous sum, but because I realized that from this moment forward, I could finally step out of those years of instant noodles and late-night delivery shifts in the rain. I had achieved something that, in my parents' eyes, might never truly be valued. Right after the deal, friends in the industry asked if I was going to buy a luxury car or take a long vacation in Europe. But the truth was, I never craved any of that. What I wanted was a place that truly belonged to me, a table no one could ever pull my chair away from. So I began searching for a special property, not downtown, but somewhere I could breathe, somewhere far from the cycle of comparison and disdain. After many trips, I found it. A lake house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, just an hour and a half's drive from Chicago. The house sat on more than 12 acres of land, stretching all the way to the water's edge. The asking price was $6 million, a figure that might make some people dizzy, but for me, it was an investment in peace. I first stepped inside on a crisp autumn morning when mist still drifted across the lake. The entire rear facade was built of floor-to-ceiling glass, opening onto a view of water shimmering silver. On the wide deck, you could set a long banquet table and still have space for children to run and play. Inside, the open kitchen featured a black walnut island with gleaming granite counters. The living room held a tall gray stone fireplace that nearly touched the ceiling, the kind that made me want to light a fire and sit beside its warmth the moment I saw it. Upstairs were 5 bedrooms, each with its own balcony facing the lake. There was even a small dock where I could slip into the water on sweltering summer days, or cast a line when winter froze half the lake solid. I kept the purchase private. No photos posted, no stories shared with colleagues, and certainly not a word to my parents or Hannah. I had grown too used to seeing my efforts twisted or reduced to a backdrop for my sister's spotlight. If they found out, I could already hear the comments. Avery just got lucky, or worse, I'm sure Hannah helped somehow. I refused to let that happen. This lake house was more than property, it was the result of years of being shoved to the kids' table, forgotten at airports, treated as a shadow. It was my silent answer to all those holidays I had spent quietly in the kitchen. During my first weekends at Lake Geneva, I often came alone. I brought my laptop, a few books, and packets of herbal tea. By day, I sat by the glass windows watching the lake shift colors with the sun, remembering every step of the road I had taken. By night, I lit the fireplace, letting the crackle of burning wood break the stillness. For the first time, I felt I had a home no one could take away, a place where I could invite those who truly valued me and say, "Here, everyone has a seat." I guarded that secret so carefully that even my friends would sometimes tease me. "Avery, where do you disappear to every weekend, never posting a single picture?" I would just smile and brush it off with, "Just getting away for a little quiet." Because for me, the lake house wasn't about showing off, it was about healing. Every time I stood on the deck with the wind rolling in off the water, I could almost hear the whisper of the child I used to be. At last, I have my own table, a place where no one can force me to sit with the kids while others raise their glasses at the main table. And I swore to myself that when the moment came, this place would stand as proof that I had existed, that I had built, that I had grown no matter how much. In my parents' eyes, I was still just a shadowed name behind Hannah. This would be my final card, one I never thought I would ever get to play. I still remember that early winter afternoon in Chicago, when the wind cut down the long streets and bare branches scraped against my apartment windows. I had just returned from Lake Geneva after a quiet weekend there, still floating in the calm it gave me, when my phone buzzed again. My mother, Judith's message, glowed on the screen. "Thanksgiving this year is just Hannah and her husband, immediate family only." "I've already told you," I replied with a single word, "enjoy." But after setting the phone down, another thought flashed through me. Was I truly the only one being excluded? Or were there others quietly left outside the circle of immediate family, my mother claimed? I decided to call Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister. I knew she too had often endured being belittled by her sister. When the call connected, her voice carried a trace of surprise. "Avery, it's been so long since you called. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and asked directly, "Did you get an invitation for Thanksgiving this year?" On the other end there was a pause, then a dry laugh, one that carried no joy at all. "No, sweetheart, your sister told me it's immediate family only." Meaning just Hannah and Tyler. Her voice wavered. Never in my life have I seen a Thanksgiving shrunk so small that it leaves out a sister and her own niece. My throat tightened, but I kept going. I called my cousin Noah, who now lives in Indianapolis. The moment he picked up, he let out a bitter laugh. "Let me guess, Hannah's in the spotlight again, and this time none of us got invited?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's right," I said. "You didn't get an invitation either." Noah replied, "No." My mom's furious, but honestly, I don't want to fight for a seat at a table where we've always been nothing but shadows. Next, I called my cousin Kayla, who lives in Milwaukee. As soon as she heard my question, she said, "Avery, I didn't get one either. And you know what? Even Grandma Evelyn was complaining to me this morning. This is the first time in 30 years she hasn't been invited to Thanksgiving at her own daughter's house." Hearing that, my heart twisted. Grandma Evelyn, the one who always looked at me with compassion, the one who never denied my existence, was now excluded too. I didn't hesitate anymore. I dialed Grandma's number. When she answered, her voice trembled with anger. "Avery, do you know what your mother said? She texted me that this year is immediate family only." I asked her, "So your 80-year-old mother doesn't count as family?" And she just stayed silent. I couldn't believe it. I listened to her heavy sigh, and I realized her pain was no different from the pain I had carried through all my childhood. I set the phone down and sat silently on the kitchen chair. Outside the window, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. In that moment, I realized this was no longer just my story. I wasn't the only one left out. An entire branch of the family, Aunt Linda, Cousin Noah, Cousin Kayla, and Grandma Evelyn, had all been cut away simply because my mother wanted every ounce of spotlight to shine on Hannah and Tyler. In the past, each of us endured that feeling of being pushed aside in silence. But this year, I would not let it happen again. I pictured the lake house in my mind. The long wooden dining table, the tall stone fireplace reaching almost to the ceiling, the glass doors opening onto the still waters of the lake. That was the place where I could create a Thanksgiving for the ones left outside, a table where no one would be excluded. I would invite everyone, my aunt, my cousins, my grandmother, and anyone who had ever felt they weren't important enough to sit at the main table. From this moment on, I decided there would be a new rule, one the Collins family had never known. One table for all, no more kids' table, no more chairs pushed into the corner. Every person would have a place card with their name handwritten, set neatly in line with the rest. Grandma Evelyn would sit in the center, so her voice could carry across the table. Aunt Linda would no longer be tucked quietly at the far end, listening to others boast about the success of the main family. Noah and Kayla would be free to laugh and raise their glasses without holding anything back. As I pictured it, a powerful energy swelled in my chest. I had once been the child forced to sit at the kids' table well into 18, the one forgotten at the airport in 2018, the one given a $25 gift card while someone else drove home in a brand new car. But this year, I would be the one to set the table. I would write each name on a small card, place it on the crisp white tablecloth, line up the wine glasses, soup bowls, and polished silverware. I would light the fire in the stone hearth so that when they walked in, the warmth would erase years of being left out. I smiled to myself, feeling for the first time in years that I could take control of the story. This Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be sending a bitter one-word "enjoy." Instead, I would look into the eyes of those excluded like me and say, "Welcome, here, everyone has a place." When I decided to host a Thanksgiving at Lake Geneva, I knew one thing for certain: if this gathering was to truly be healing, it couldn't be a half-hearted dinner. It had to be a testament that every person was seen, heard, and valued. I began preparing with all the experience I had gathered from years in kitchens and managing logistics, as if I were planning a full-scale project. First came the menu. I wanted the meal to embody the spirit of a classic American Thanksgiving rooted in tradition, flavored by the Midwest where I had grown up, but with a touch of Southern comfort to make it warm and familiar. The turkey would be the centerpiece, marinated with fresh herbs like rosemary, thyme, and sage, stuffed with onions, celery, and buttery breadcrumbs. I ordered a nearly 20-pound organic turkey from a farm in Wisconsin, fresh and large enough to feed an entire long table. Alongside it, I planned golden cornbread, soft, slightly sweet, evoking autumn evenings down south. There would also be green bean casserole topped with crispy fried onions, silky mashed potatoes rich with butter and cream, and a tangy sweet cranberry relish to cut through the richness. And for dessert, the table would shine with decadent pumpkin pie and sweet pecan pie, the kind both children and grandparents could savor with equal delight. But for me, a meal has never been just about the food. It's an experience, a feeling that when you walk in, you know there is a place set aside for you. I carefully noted everyone's allergies and preferences. My cousin Kayla is allergic to tree nuts, so I made sure the chef prepared a separate pumpkin pie completely nut-free. Noah has been a partial vegetarian for years, so I planned a tray of vegetarian lasagna with portobello mushrooms and ricotta cheese. I also arranged non-alcoholic drinks, fresh apple cider, hot tea, natural sodas, and even a non-alcoholic eggnog for the kids. I didn't want anyone to feel left out, quietly pushing food aside because it wasn't right for them. Another important detail: no forced prayers under a single banner. In my family, every year my mother would ask the pastor or Hannah to stand up and lead a long-winded prayer, turning the meal into a stage for moral showmanship. This year, I chose differently. I would invite everyone simply to share a moment of gratitude. Those who wanted to could speak, those who didn't could just sit back and smile. It wasn't a performance, but a genuine pause for truth. I didn't forget the personal touch either. It was something I never had at my parents' table, a small gift chosen with each person's heart in mind. For Grandma Evelyn, I ordered a box of imported herbal tea from her favorite shop in Madison, paired with a small clay teapot. For Noah, the jazz lover, I hunted down a rare Miles Davis vinyl he had been searching for years. For the children, I wrapped shiny silver paper around Lego ship sets, so when they tore into them, their eyes would light up. I also set up a corner with a brand new Instax camera and fresh film, so everyone could snap photos and pin them on a string of wooden clips in the living room. Beside it, I laid out a giant jigsaw puzzle of the United States, so anyone could sit down, pick up a piece, and add it like a symbol that each of us was an important part of the whole. I prepared the operations as if it were a full-scale logistics campaign. The lake house had a narrow driveway, so I hired a valet team to handle parking neatly, ensuring no one would struggle in the cold snow. I had a gentle ramp built leading straight into the main hall so Grandma could move easily in her wheelchair. On the deck outside, I set up a small play area with mini basketball and ring toss games for the kids, giving them space to run around before dinner. Inside the living room, I curated a playlist called Americana Thanksgiving, blending warm country tunes, folk ballads, and soft classical pieces. The music wouldn't overpower conversations, it would be a backdrop, adding warmth to the atmosphere. I envisioned the entire process like an assembly line of care. From the moment guests stepped onto the deck, greeted by the valet, their coats hung neatly in a pinewood closet, their names placed on handwritten place cards, a warm cup of cider passed into their hands by me, and then walking into a hall filled with light and the aroma of roasting turkey. Every step was designed so they would feel, yes, I belong here. No one left in the hallway waiting for a seat, no one pushed to a corner kids' table. No one made to eat in silence on the margins. In the nights before the holiday, I sat alone in the wide living room, writing each name in gold ink on place cards, placing them beside gleaming white porcelain plates. I labeled every food tray, checked the allergy list twice. I tested the playlist to make sure the speakers worked smoothly. I even wheeled myself down the new ramp in a borrowed chair, ensuring it wouldn't be slippery if snow fell. Some might say I was overdoing it, but I knew the smallest details are what make the difference. I had once been the one pushed aside, the one eating cold leftovers in the kitchen while laughter rang from the main table. This time, I would be the one tending the fire, the one opening the door and saying, "Welcome, here, no one is a stranger." And when I imagined Grandma Evelyn sipping her herbal tea, Noah spinning a jazz record on the turntable, and the children cheering over their Lego sets, I felt a strange mix rising inside me. Nervous anticipation, yet deep peace. Maybe, at last, I was about to have a real Thanksgiving. That morning, I woke early to find a thin layer of snow spread across the wooden steps leading up to the lake house. The air carried that crisp Wisconsin sharpness, biting cold, yet it made me feel vividly awake. In the kitchen, Margaret and the small cooking team had already begun. The clatter of knives, the scent of butter melting in cast-iron pans, the aroma of roasting turkey drifting down the hallways. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching SUVs make their way up the drive, headlights cutting through the snow like falling stars. The first car pulled up, and out stepped Aunt Linda with my cousins Noah and Kayla. I walked out onto the porch to greet them, wrapping each one in a long, warm embrace. Grandma Evelyn arrived right after, seated in her wheelchair, pushed down the ramp by Linda's son. I had worried about that ramp all week, but the wheels rolled smoothly, without the slightest hitch. She looked up at me, smiling through misty eyes. "Avery, you've done what I've wished to see my whole life." In that instant, I knew every hour of preparation had been worth it. Guests kept arriving. Kayla's 2 children rushed inside, squealing when they saw the 12-foot Christmas tree glowing with golden lights and neatly stacked presents underneath. Noah set his guitar in the corner of the living room, promising to play a few soft jazz pieces later. Heavy coats were tucked neatly into the pinewood closet, snow boots lined up along the rug, and each person received a warm cup of cider as they stepped in. I watched their faces closely and saw it. Surprise mingled with relief, as if they hadn't just entered a house, but finally a place where they truly belonged. When everyone had gathered in the great hall, I led them into the dining room. The long walnut table was draped with a white cloth, each place set with a handwritten card. There was no kids' table, no one pushed into a corner. Just one long row of chairs, all equal, with Grandma seated at the center, her children and grandchildren around her, voices and laughter echoing as if breaking a curse that had lingered for years. I invited everyone to share a moment of gratitude instead of a rehearsed prayer. Noah lifted his glass of water and said he was thankful that the family could finally come together without living under the shadow of comparison. Kayla whispered thanks that her children could see a Thanksgiving where they truly had a seat. When it was Grandma Evelyn's turn, she placed her trembling hand on the table, her voice raspy but firm. "It's been so long since I felt like I was sitting in a real family." I bit my lip to keep the tears back, because those words were the greatest reward of all. Dinner began. Margaret brought out the golden roast turkey and set it in the center of the table, the skin crisp, the aroma of herbs filling the air. We passed bowls of creamy mashed potatoes, warm cornbread, and ruby-red cranberry relish that gleamed like jewels. Kayla laughed when her son spooned a heap of green beans onto his plate and suddenly exclaimed, "This tastes better than Grandma's." The whole table burst into laughter, not forced, not sharp, but light and genuine. I poured red wine, then handed Grandma a cup of herbal tea. She lifted it, her eyes glistening as she recognized it as the very blend she used to love but rarely allowed herself to buy. "You remembered even this small thing," she whispered. I only nodded, smiling. The sound of silverware against plates mingled with voices flowing freely. No one interrupted, no one dismissed. Noah told the story of being forgotten at the airport in 2018. The table roared with laughter, not cruel laughter, but the kind that releases old weight. And I realized, some wounds can begin to heal with nothing more than one honest meal shared together. In that moment, Mia, Kayla's 17-year-old daughter, pulled out her phone. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Aunt Avery, can we take a family picture out on the porch?" I nodded, a little nervous, not wanting the evening to turn into a show-off display. But I let the kids lead everyone out onto the wooden deck, where golden light from the balconies spilled onto the snow. We lined up in one long row, Grandma seated in the middle, me standing beside her, the kids clustered up front, Noah holding his guitar, Kayla hugging her 2 children close. And for once, everyone smiled naturally. Mia pressed the shutter, then quickly posted the photo on TikTok and Instagram with a simple caption. "When they exclude you, build your own table." At first, she set it to private, sharing only with her friends. But some of them reposted it, left comments, and before long, the photo began to spread. I didn't know it right then, only noticed Mia and her sister giggling as their phones buzzed nonstop. When we returned to the dining room, the atmosphere was nothing like the Thanksgivings of the past. No one sat in silence on the margins. Everyone had a story, a glass of wine or cider in hand, an unguarded look in their eyes. The stone fireplace in the living room burned brightly, logs crackling like a drumbeat underlining our conversations. I sat back, drew a deep breath, and felt for the first time in my life that I was no longer just a quiet shadow. That night, when dessert was served, slices of golden pumpkin pie, glossy pecan pie dripping with brown syrup, Grandma Evelyn laid her hand gently over mine, gave it a soft squeeze, and whispered, "Avery, you've done what I thought no one in this family would ever dare. You built a table where no one is left behind." I smiled, throat tight with emotion, and simply answered, "Grandma, this is Thanksgiving." "How?" When the family finished clearing the table, I leaned against the window frame, watching the snow fall quietly outside, my heart still beating to the rhythm of the evening's joy. But less than 10 minutes later, the calm shattered. My phone buzzed relentlessly, the screen lighting up again and again as if it might burst. Dozens of missed calls, messages flooding in from the family group chat, from my mother, from Hannah. I hesitated for a moment, then opened them. The first message hit me like a slap. It was from Hannah. Just 4 words, but sharp with the same bitterness I had known for years. "So cheap, Avery." Then more followed in quick succession. "Pathetic. Everyone can see you're just desperate for attention." I exhaled, setting the phone down on the walnut table without replying. Next, the screen flashed. "Mom calling." I glanced at Grandma Evelyn sitting by the fireplace, her face strangely calm. She gave a small nod, as if telling me to answer. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the coffee table. At once, my mother's voice filled the room, shrill, tense. "Avery, do you have any idea what's happening? The whole town of Columbus is talking. Pastor Reynolds even mentioned it at morning service. Are you trying to humiliate this family?" I kept my tone steady, neither sharp nor soft. "I only did exactly what you told me. You said Thanksgiving this year was immediate family, meaning Hannah and her husband. So I hosted another table, for those who were also excluded. I didn't invite the press. I didn't call any pastor. If people found out, it's because others chose to share." Then my father's voice broke in raspy, strained. "Avery, you don't understand. You've made us a laughingstock. What do people think when they see the whole family gathered in Wisconsin while your own parents aren't even there?" I bit my lip, ready to respond, but Grandma Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her voice slow but firm. "Robert, Judy, enough. All your lives you've abandoned Avery. From the time she was a child, sitting at the kids' table until she was 18, while Hannah was handed car keys right in front of her. Today, for the first time in years, she did what this family should have done long ago, opened the door and gave everyone a seat they deserved. Don't lecture me about being a laughingstock. The real disgrace is how you turned family gatherings into a stage for Hannah, while everyone else stood outside." The line went silent for a few seconds, then my mother broke down, her sobs catching in her throat. I never meant to hurt her. It's just... Hannah was always sweeter, everyone praised her, and Avery just... Grandma cut her off sharply. "There is no such thing as sweeter. There is such a thing as conditional love. And you let it dictate how you raised your children." The result was a child who had to carry the weight alone, building an entire life just to prove she was worthy. Thankfully, she was strong enough to do it. But the price you pay is this distance. And now, you have to face that truth. And. I drew in a deep breath, then spoke clearly, my voice steady in a way it had never been before. "I'm not here to argue. I just want to say this once, from now on, everything will no longer revolve around Hannah. In this lake house, anyone who walks through the door has a place, without exception. No more kids' table, no more looks of comparison. This is my table and my rule is simple, whoever comes will be seen, heard, and valued." My father sighed, the sound like wind rushing through the phone line. "Daughter, you're being extreme. We can talk about this later, but Hannah, she feels betrayed." I let out a quiet laugh, the first time I hadn't felt small under his voice. If Hannah feels betrayed just because I chose to live honestly, maybe she should ask herself who betrayed first. I don't have time for that game anymore. I win all. On the other end, my mother's voice came soft, pleading, "Avery, please, at least think of the family's reputation." But I pressed the button and ended the call. No shouting, no long explanations. Just a clean break, like shutting a door that had creaked for years. The room fell silent. I looked up and saw Noah nodding, Kayla squeezing her husband's hand tightly, and Grandma smiling tired but proud. I sat back down by the fireplace, drawing in a long breath, letting the crackle of burning wood soothe my ears. Grandma laid her frail hand over mine and said gently, "You've just set a boundary. That's not rebellion, it's how you protect yourself. And all of us." I nodded, my eyes stinging. In that moment, it felt as if I had stepped through an invisible doorway. No longer the child always pushed aside, but an adult who knew her worth and had the courage to say, "Enough." That night, my phone kept buzzing. But this time, instead of feeling crushed by it, I set it aside, letting the vibration fade into a dull background hum. I knew those calls no longer had the power to define me. I had my own table now, and in the glow of the fire, I looked around at the beloved faces laughing, talking, sharing the last slice of pecan pie. They were my real family. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel alone. A week after that Thanksgiving night at Lake Geneva, when the laughter had faded and the golden lights on the porch had been packed away, the lake house settled into stillness. I stayed a few extra days, both to tidy up and to savor the rare peace. But inside, I knew there was still one thing unfinished, a dinner meant only for the so-called immediate family, my parents and Hannah. Not to reconcile, but to finally speak the truths that had been buried for far too long. That evening, wind swept in from the lake, sharp as knives against the porch. I prepared a simple meal, roast beef cooked just right, creamy buttered mashed potatoes, warm bread fresh from the oven, and a single bottle of red wine. No background music, no twinkling lights, only a few candles set on the walnut table and the steady flames in the stone fireplace. This was not a performance. This was a night where truth would have a seat at the table with us. When the familiar SUV pulled up to the porch, I opened the door to greet them. My father entered first, his heavy coat dusted with snow, his face stern but his eyes flickering with unease. My mother followed, clutching her scarf tightly, avoiding direct eye contact. Hannah was the last to step inside, her leather boots marking the snow-damp rug, her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting quickly around the wide room before dropping down, silent. I hung up their coats and invited them to sit at the table. No one rushed to speak, the air was thick, as if each of them was waiting for someone else to break the silence. I poured wine, slid a glass toward each of them, then set my hand on the table. "I invited you here not to show off this house, and not to hurl blame. I only want to say what I've never had the chance to in the past 30 years. No one interrupted. Only the crackling of the fire filled the space behind my words. I began with the smallest but sharpest memories, sitting at the kids' table until I was 18, while Hannah sat in the place of honor at the main one. I recalled the Thanksgiving when Hannah was handed the keys to a brand new Mini Cooper to cheers and applause, while I received only a white envelope with a $25 gift card inside. I told them about the year I got into UIUC, and the whole family dismissed it as too far, too inconvenient, while Hannah chose Ohio State and was celebrated as keeping close to family. I reminded them of Thanksgiving 2018. When I was forgotten at the airport because my mother was too busy baking pumpkin pie for Hannah. Each memory cut like a blade, but I spoke them calmly, without shaking, without anger, like reading out a factual report. Then I told them about my college years, scraping by on tuition, working kitchen shifts until exhaustion, sleeping on worn sofas. I explained how those very years taught me to run operations, which led me to founding Mealbridge. I described how we gathered surplus food, connected restaurants with food banks, and how during the pandemic, that system saved hundreds of tons of meals from being wasted. I spoke of nights when cash flow dried up, when I thought everything would collapse, yet I endured until I sold the company for $82 million. At that moment, I looked straight into my parents' eyes. I did all of that. And yet, in your eyes, I was still nothing more than Hannah's shadow. The room sank into a long silence. My father leaned back, his hand tapping lightly against his wine glass, then drew in a deep breath. Avery, maybe. I never really saw you. I was too busy noticing the things that were easy to brag about, like Hannah's achievements. And you? I thought you could handle yourself, so I didn't look. His voice trembled, as though he was touching a raw truth for the very first time. My mother set her glass down, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. I never meant to hurt you. It's just. Hannah always needed me more, always came to me to share things, while you were so independent, hardly ever said much. I thought you were fine. But maybe. That was just me lying to myself. I turned to Hannah. She stayed silent, her hands clutching the napkin until it wrinkled. I waited, but she said nothing. Only in her eyes did I see something different for the first time, not the confidence of the golden child, but a vague fear. Fear of losing the center, fear of the light shifting away. The meal unfolded slowly, each bite of beef, each spoonful of mashed potatoes. No bursts of laughter, no promises that things will change. Only a heavy silence, dense yet filled with recognition. I wasn't waiting for a reconciliatory hug, nor did I need elaborate apologies. All I wanted was for them to hear me. And for the first time in my life, they did. When dinner ended, I walked them to the porch. My father shook my hand, firmer than usual. My mother hugged me briefly, hurriedly, but enough for me to sense the awkwardness in her gesture. Hannah lingered at the door, turned to look at me, her lips parting as if to say something, but in the end, she only gave a small nod before walking away. I didn't stop her. I knew the boundary had been set. When the heavy wooden door closed behind them, I stood still for a moment, listening to the wind rushing over the lake. I didn't feel completely relieved, but I felt clearer than ever. I had stepped out of the old cycle. Not to cut ties completely, but to draw the boundary. From now on, I would no longer wait for their approval. I already had a family of my own, the ones who chose to be present, not out of obligation but out of love. After that heavy, immediate family-only dinner, the days that followed opened into a new current. The family group chat, silent for years, suddenly came alive. Someone posted photos from the Thanksgiving night at Lake Geneva. Another shared a video of the kids working on the puzzle in the library, and Aunt Linda wrote, "Avery, next year, let me handle dessert. My pecan pie can hold its own against anyone's." Noah sent a playful message. "I'll bring the whole band, free of charge, as long as there's a corner for an electric guitar." Kayla promised to take charge of decorations, from wreaths to the string lights on the porch. Slowly, the group chat built a shared calendar. Thanksgiving by the lake, next year. Instead of waiting for my parents to dictate, everyone now divided tasks themselves, making promises, and most importantly anchoring me at the center. Meanwhile, Mia's photo of the family on the porch with the caption, "When they exclude you, build your own table," continued to spread. It was reposted not only by her friends but also by strangers who resonated with it. I began receiving messages from people who had once been excluded from their own family tables. "Your story reminded me of the year I was left outside while everyone else had Christmas dinner," or "I was kept at the kids' table until I had children of my own." Instead of shying away, I decided to turn that momentum into something meaningful. I announced in a public post, my lake house would open one weekend before Thanksgiving as a collection point for food banks in the Chicago-Milwaukee area. Visitors could bring canned goods, fresh produce, or cash donations. Everything would be distributed through the network I had once built with MealBridge. It was both a way to tie back to my startup roots and a declaration. Meals were never meant to be about showing off, they were meant to be shared. The responses came faster than I ever expected. A food bank in Kenosha sent a letter of thanks, asking to partner officially. A restaurant in Milwaukee promised to bring an entire truckload of canned goods. Even a few former MealBridge employees volunteered to come back and help with coordination. I realized then, building a table was no longer just about family, it was rippling out into the community. Still, I knew I needed clear boundaries for the future. I wrote directly in the family group chat. The lake house will always be open to everyone, including mom and dad, under one condition: one table for all. No more kids' table, no more divisions. Whoever sits down will be respected. That message was met with a flood of hearts and clapping emojis. My parents read it but didn't respond right away. Still, the rule was written, undeniable. The next Thanksgiving was still a year away, but the anticipation had already begun. Kayla shared pictures of invitation cards she was designing. Noah practiced a few new songs in advance. Grandma Evelyn messaged, "This time I'll cook my old stuffing recipe. I want to contribute." And I too felt a calm I'd never known before. Thanksgiving was no longer an ache, but a new tradition. And so, one chilly afternoon, I sat on the porch of the lake house, staring at the still water. The wind was cold enough to remind me winter was near, but the kitchen behind me stayed warm, the scent of bread and burning wood in the air. I sipped my tea, watched the shimmer of twilight stretch across the lake, and whispered to myself, I did it. Not because I had defeated anyone, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to pull out a chair. I had built a table of my own. And more importantly, I had saved seats for those who truly valued me. If you are hearing this story, I want you to remember one thing. You do not need anyone's approval to have worth. You don't need to sit on the margins, waiting for someone to call your name. You can build your own table and open chairs for the ones who deserve them. That is what real Family Island